Hi everyone, this is Asif from Wireless Solution Company in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Today, I'm going to discuss about how organizations can prepare their systems to be compliant with the latest requirements of e-invoicing that Saudi Tax Authority has mandated. So we will also look at one of the implementation case scenarios using Microsoft AX 2012 R3 version. So let's continue. Wireless Solution Company has industry partnerships with numerous OEM providers, software vendors throughout the globe, and we'll see how these partnerships would facilitate in enabling the seamless integration with the compliance requirements. We also have executed numerous projects with public and private companies in Saudi Arabia. So we have thorough experience and expertise in such kind of customizations and deployments. So let's look at the timeline for implementation that the tax authority has required and planned out how organizations can roll all these changes seamlessly without having, any downfalls. So the key dates that we have to note is June 2021. That is when the final technical requirements, controls, details, and mandatory fields, how the solutions need to incorporate, what are the mandatory details in an invoice and how they are, need to be transmitted using XML files, and what are the universal business language methods and terms that are required in the XML document. So by June 2021, we will have that set of details ready with us. December 2021, they expect certain requirements to be fulfilled by all of the sectors, and every solution that is approved need to be in place in order to enable the electronic invoicing. By June 2022, that's after 6 months of the first phase, every system needs to be integrated within the GAZT's platform. So all of your invoices need to be integrated with the GAZT's system. Every data that you are going to send to the buyer, to whoever you are selling the solutions and services, the invoice details need to be transmitted directly from your system to the ZATCA's platform without human manual integration. So the integration needs to be automated, where the data has to be transferred, validated. Once the data is validated and certified, that's the time your buyers get the invoice copy. So even before you send a copy of your invoice to the buyer, the data is validated by the tax authority. So now let's look at the standards and what data we have from the General Authority of ZATCA and Tax. So as of now, this is in the draft stage. This will be finalized, but this has been released on the GAZT portal. So we have data directory, we have the dictionary of the terminologies used for XML, the XML implementation standards, the security protocols and implementation standards. So the connection, how the API would be integrated with the GAZT system is yet to be released, but that anyway will be on the next stage. So as of now, we just have to prepare all our data to be compliant. So as of now, for the preparation stage, all of the details are released. Connection would be the next stage, which would be seamless, because once the data is ready to be integrated with the API, it can, we just need to know the connection details, which would be released later on. So in the first phase, the invoice format will be released by GAZT. So there is a structured invoice. You have to make sure that seller details, buyer details, QR code, and UUID, universal unique identifier, or invoice reference number, all those details need to be present on the invoices. So this is mandatory to be implemented by December 2021. Second phase would be in June 2022, where the further integration will happen between our systems and the ZATCA systems directly. So there won't be requirement of manually inputting all the data into the GAZT portal. All of the data would be automated by a single click. The data would be transmitted to the GAZT portal. If all the fields are present, it gets validated and we get the unique identifier for that particular invoice. So it would be a certified validated invoice, which even the buyer can verify or confirm using the QR code. So let's look at the system compliance. So in short, our e-invoicing system must be having these features. A, connect with the APIs. So API compliance is mandatory. Compliance with cybersecurity laws. So all the data needs to be tamper-proof, we need to make sure that all of our systems are monitored. If there is going to be any, intervention, anyone trying to modify or tamper the data, we need to make sure that we have all the compliance standards implemented and are in place. The fourth important thing is it must have connectivity to the internet. So regardless of where our invoices are going to be billed, where we are going to be performing the invoicing, and be it invoicing or any sales order or any credit notes or receipt notes, everything has to have, the system needs to be connected to the internet for validating all those. So credit notes, even credit notes need to be certified and validated. So every every document that is being transferred from the buyer to the seller is validated from the ZATCA portal. So the basics of this, how it happens is taxpayer logs into the GAZT portal, enrolls themselves, and provides the details of the solution, what they have. So in our case, we say we have AX Dynamics, or we say we have SAP, we have SMAC, or anything which is certified, which is approved from Saudi tax authority. That solution, we enroll, we validate the taxpayer data, we generate a cryptographic stamp identifier, download that and install the cryptographic stamp identifier using public key and private key on our system. So this is a one-time implementation that would be required. Now let's look at the two types of invoices that we'll need to discuss: simplified tax invoice and standard tax invoice. The key difference between two is simplified tax invoice has the total value of the invoice cannot be more than 1,000 riyals, and hence the customer details, the buyer details, need not be present on the invoice, such as the buyer tax identity or buyer name might not be included on the simplified tax invoice. However, on the standard tax invoice, the value of goods and service is more than 1,000 riyals. It has buyer details, it has supply date, additional fields that are mandatory. It has to be in Arabic and any other preferred language. So this has to be complied. Let's go look at the next slide. This is the draft workflow of standard e-invoice that would be required. So every invoice is in standard e-invoice, there is mandatory and optional fields. Basically, it starts from sending of e-invoice file to GAZT portal. So supplier basically creates an e-invoice file, sends it to GAZT. GAZT then performs the check if all the fields are in the XML file in the proper format, validated. After it's validated, it digitally stamps the invoice, creates a cleared invoice file. So you have a cleared invoice file. This is sent back to the supplier. And after supplier receives this, he can then in turn send the cleared invoice file from ZATCA directly to the buyer. So this is the new concept where you get a cleared invoice file and then you are sharing that with the buyer. Buyer, after getting the invoice copy, he can verify using the QR code with GAZT's system that if this has authenticity, it is validated, or the status of this invoice. Next, this has been shared in the workflow reference in the GAZT's portal. So this is the diagram available in the document shared by the GAZT, which is pretty much the same as how the steps happen. Second, the key requirements in the first phase for simple standard invoice is issue, receive, store e-invoices and e-notes. That has to be compulsory from December 2020. That is, all businesses need to receive, store, and archive e-invoices and e-notes. Implement mandatory and optional fields within their invoice as of how the structure is. So even though we are not implementing directly the integration between GAZT portal and our own systems, with the business systems, but still we need to store an issue in that specific format. So these are the mandatory fields available mentioned in the standard documents. The invoice type description is mandatory, invoice reference number, invoice issue date, seller name, address, and ID, buyer name, address, and ID, product, service, and description, VAT calculation, breakup, and all sorts of things. This is in the first phase. In the first phase, this is mandatory for standard invoices. So the key here is standard e-invoice for first phase. In the second phase of standard e-invoice, the unique identifier is additional, QR code is additional, plus this data will be first shared with the ZATCA portal, get validated, and then sent to the buyer. So let me explain about how e-invoicing would be done for simplified invoices. That probably would be for most of the retail outlets. In case you don't have entire details of the customer. So it could be cash customers, it could be, walk-in customers. In that case, how the simplified invoicing performs. The cash registers generate invoice with a QR code, including digital signature. How does that happen? All of the cash registers have their individual unique CA certificates installed on their systems, issued by the ZATCA and tax authority. So this certificate is downloaded first from the portal and applied on the cash registers. Each cash register has public and private keys. These public and private keys are used, and the CA certificate used to generate the QR code on each of the invoice. So there is a unique QR code on each invoice. Using that QR code, customers, they can check the status of the invoice. So they can verify the invoice using that QR code. Every invoice, after it's been processed, say 50 invoices from cashier A, cashier B, cashier C, they go in frequencies. So every 4 hours or 8 hours, these batches go for validation, and certified copy of that invoice would be then, the invoice would be then certified in the GAZT portal. After it's validated, the customer, when he scans the QR code again, it would say that the invoice is certified to the buyer. This is the workflow reference available in the GAZT document itself. So it's pretty much the same the cache tills are connected to the data center. So we just mark DC as all of that is connected to the data center. Data center has the API to push all the invoices periodically in different frequencies to the GAZT's platform to validate and certify them. So this is the process for the simplified invoices. There is, however, a significant difference for simplified invoice and e-notes. There are a couple of additional requirements that needs to be rolled out in the first phase. So in the first phase itself, they need to display a QR code. So in standard invoices, there is no requirement for a QR code in the first phase itself. However, in simplified invoices, you require a QR code in the first phase itself. There need to be control and mechanisms to avoid tampering of e-invoices. So between the time it's sent and validated, there needs to be a control mechanism to avoid nobody can touch that details and data, be it the price or quantity. Nobody should be able to touch it. There needs to be a control mechanism that also has to be complied with the security protocols defined by the ZATCA and tax authority. So let's go for an example case of how we can implement a standard invoicing for in AX system itself. So let's create a sales order. So you create a sales order in AX, enter the customer details, select the customer account, enter the customer name, select the delivery name, delivery address, enter the sales order details, select the site, warehouse, whatever the relevant data is. After that, let's go to sales order, edit it. Enter the product name. So you've entered customer name, you enter the product, you enter the quantity, you enter the units, enter the price, enter discount, create a packing list. The second step, create a packing slip, register a packing slip, update the packing slip, packed. Now the final step is creating the invoice. So this is the main step which becomes different, which we have to customize. So once you select invoice, this is the sales order ready to be invoiced. You have all the particulars here, and you could see a new field called as generate invoice. So after that, you can see even there are new fields called E-Invoice invoice identifier number, basically unique identifier, invoice reference. So all these details need to be added as of what GAZT would require us to do. So once we click on generate e-invoice, so this step would be in the phase 2 because the connection parameters are still not shared by GAZT. So we need to have this much ready that we have all these details, mandatory fields, following all the formats, and creating a space for e-invoice reference number, reference data, and UUIDs, and all the extra details that GAZT has mandated. And once the connection is established, the system needs to be, you just click on generate e-invoice, and all the data is pushed using the XML file. Once it is validated, there is an XML response acknowledging that all this data is approved and certified in the GAZT's system. It gives you the acknowledgement date, unique IRN number, unique UUID, and all those things. Once that is there, you can then see for each of the invoices, you can see that there is the fields are automatically populated here. So now let's look at achieving the objective for phase 1. So in phase 1, we have to follow all of the regulations and implement the mandatory field requirements, implement the security implementation standards, implement the XML implementation standards mandated by the GAZT. So this side is having all the documentation for this implementation rollout. The link I'll be sharing with you. It's on the website of GAZT portal. Let's look at the electronic invoice data dictionary, which is very critical for developers to have in order to implement the XML files and the terminology that is approved, the universal business language, and all the tags that are required. So UBL specifications, GAZT invoice category, business terms, ID, business term name, and example as well is shared by GAZT. So this data dictionary has, comprehensive details about each and every specific mandatory field or even optional field. So line item ID, this has to be 1, 2, 3, whatever the example can be. For example, if you look at the date format, so the date format has to be, let's go on the top, it should be the first lines. So the date format should be in this way, that is YYYMMDD, and the invoice identifier should be, that is the unique invoice identification. Alphanumeric is allowed, and the example is given here. All the transaction codes, everything is clearly mentioned out here. The QR code, the example, how it happens, and how it can be implemented along with our system. So this document is comprehensive, and it should provide clarity to the XML or the developers to understand how the XML workflow happens or occurs. So this is one of the key documents that would be needed for us to implement this system. After that, let's just do a brief recap. So we've discussed about, how we submit the invoices to GAZT, how the validation, signing, and authentication happens, potential use of access points. After that, we have go live, that is for December effective date. The first phase will be the first phase would be done by 2021 December, and on June 1st, that is the complete integration end-to-end with GAZT's portal. Approach we've done with how the implementation regulation happens, potential staggered phase implementation for integration requirements. You have adoption methods, all transaction types will be mandatory under e-invoicing. There is, however, 2 exemptions, that is exempt of supplies, and if you have goods and service imports, then this is exempted from that. For example, if you're buying a hosting service from, say, GoDaddy in the United States, then this would be exempt under that circumstances. The strategy is closing the tax gap and stamping out tax avoidance. So it's trying to promote compliance and best business practice and transparency and efficiency benefits. So there is no need of manual entry of tax data by accountants into the tax systems. So this will be completely automated using the e-invoicing system. So contact us if you need more information. That's our website, that's my email, and the contact details. So if you need to know anything more further on these compliance or implementation, how we can facilitate the cybersecurity, or how we can enable the adoption methods and allow seamless integration, you can reach out to us. Thank you.